Let me first of all thank TEDxEuston for this invitation. And say that, Padutomi and I are not of the same complexion, as you can see. So I don't understand why I came immediately after him. Perhaps I represent a far more confused personality than he has just said. Because a lot of people keep asking, people can't understand what kind of priest I am. First, I have a name, Matthew, and then I have a Hassan in between, and then a Kukah. But that's a different matter altogether. This confusion is not peculiar to me. One of our friends who's a priest and had a very close family, he was very close to a family. And he used to pay them a visit, but every time he would go in his sutan. And in Nigeria, we don't wear this much, but on a Sunday, you wear your sutan. And on this particular day, he was invited for dinner with the family. And he just decided to wear a kaftan. And when his car pulled up, the little 5-year-old girl ran to the door. And she recognized him quite well. And she ran to the mother. She said, Mommy, come and see. Father has become a man. I would let me say, I am an extraordinarily privileged Nigerian. Very, very privileged. And a lot of people keep asking me why I do the things I do and why I say the things I said. Let me sound a bit immodest. There is, from Shagari, perhaps a little bit back, Gawon, up till date, there is no Nigerian president that I have not sat with one-on-one. And it's not as a result of me filling the form and saying, Mr. President, I would like to see you. It has humbled me tremendously. But it has also helped me to appreciate the complexity and the difficulty of this country called Nigeria. But it has also, rather ironically, increased my passion, my commitment in the fact that a completely different Nigeria is possible. Now, I served, as you know, on the Oputa panel, and I've since then served on other panels. I served on the Electoral Reform Committee. I'm still working, for the last 5 years, I've been working as a one-man committee to end the conflict between Shell and Ogoni. I also served as secretary of the Political Reform Conference. So I consider myself very, very privileged. But I had an experience which I'd like to share with you during the Oputa panel. It didn't come together in one moment. I have been lucky enough to travel a little bit of the length and breadth of Nigeria. And luckily for me, I come from a part of Nigeria, one, you can't find us on the map. Secondly, I come from a local government that has become notorious because we had a crisis in 1992. Zangon Kataf crisis. But even within that configuration, I'm still a minority, even at the local government level. But when I look at where I've come from and where I have been and where I am now, as I said, I can only, it only humbles me. But during the Oputa panel, it was for me a big lesson, and my book is supposed to have been out, but it's not out yet. But I have narrated my own experiences. In fact, when I started writing, I ended up with about 600 and something pages. And then we had to start talking up. The publisher said, look, Father, people don't read in this country. Let's try. So we've managed to bring it down. It's about 500 pages. It should be out in either December, or it should be out in December. But one of the experiences I had, when we sat in Abuja, because we sat in the 6 geopolitical zones, one, because we wanted to make the journeys a bit easier for people, because we didn't have a big budget to bring in everybody. But when we sat in Abuja, it was intriguing, because the northerners, the minority elements in the north, they came to me, they said, Father, you are in this Oputa panel, we know our interests have been protected. So we don't have a worry. And we are all predominantly Christians here. And you know because you're one of us. And I said, okay. Then we went to Kano. We sat in Kano. And the Alhajis in Kano called me aside. Said, Father, you know you are a northerner. And we trust you. We know you will defend our interests. You know, this sounds very strange because it wasn't choreographed in the way and manner I'm presenting it. Then we got to Lagos. And my good friend Ganifa Wehimi and a few others, they called me and said, Father, you know, we know you are objective. We know your antecedents. We know that you are going to stand for the truth and that you will protect our interests in this matter. Then we sat in Enugu. This, as I said, I'm not making this up. And a few of our priests and a few Igbo people or Hanese members, luckily for me, everywhere I go in Nigeria, there are people I know or people know me. But anyway, the Igbo said, Father, you know we suffer in this way. You also know that we are predominantly Catholic, and you are a Catholic priest. We know you will also defend our interests. As I said, these things were unfolding. Then we went to Port Harcourt. And the Ogonis singled me out. My story with the Ogonis is well told in my book. But they said, because I was, the Ogonis, a faction of the Ogonis protested about my being a member of the commission because they said I was Ken Saro-Wiwa's friend. Unfortunately, when I had never met Ken in my life, but I had written quite a few things about Ken. But anyway, the Ogonis said, Father, we know you are a minority like us, and we know what you have suffered, so you understand oppression. Now, I say this because at the end of the day, one of the things that came out very powerfully for me during the Oputa panel was a consciousness of the depth, the scale of injustice in Nigeria. Now, I had always thought, because I come, as I say, it's even, some of you probably have a much slightly better deal. Let me put it that way. Because it's a different matter if you are oppressed by an Igbo man. And you're an Igbo man, it's only that you're from another part of Igbo land or from another part of Yoruba land. Probably, you might settle a few things. You might laugh in vernacular and so on. But in the case of the minorities in northern Nigeria, Kaduna is a very peculiar case. We make up maybe like 80-90% of those who are going around weaving university degrees in Kaduna State. And yet, until Obasanjo came, there wasn't a single person from southern Kaduna who ever made it as ambassador, as minister, as permanent secretary. This is in a political arrangement in which, you distribute offices according to states. So I had lived with all this. But until we began to move around Nigeria, then I discovered each part of our country has a dark spot. Everywhere you go to in Nigeria, there are those who are in and those who are out. And so when people ask me, why do I continue to say the things I say? Well, I appreciate and I now realize, because a lot of people say, when people want to annoy me, including the priests, they say, you become a politician. And I can understand why people are nervous about politics. I can understand it. But like Miriam Makeba once said, she said, I'm a musician, I sing. But every time I pick up my microphone, they say, here comes the politician. Of course, my conviction as a priest is that it is impossible to be a priest and not be concerned about the social issues of the moment. Because those of you, if you read the gospel, and for me it's a very powerful thing, Matthew chapter 25, where there's a narrative from verse 31 of what the final judgment is going to be like. This time everything is done. You can't go back. This is the end of life. This is judgment time. What is interesting to me about that judgment is that all the terrible things we had always thought about, they are not mentioned. There's nothing about adultery. There's nothing about fornication. There's nothing about abortion. There's nothing about all the things we've always thought about as the most terrible sins. But what is most fascinating and most powerful is that Jesus Christ is saying, you're going to go to heaven, not because of the things you did not do, But you go to heaven because I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I was sick in prison. And then he doesn't say anything about, because the people in shock say, when did we ever? Because if we had seen you hungry, we would have given you swan water, not other. When did we see you hungry? Because, and Jesus suddenly says, as long as you did it to the least of my brothers, you did it to me. These other guys are going to perdition because of the things they didn't do. We live in a very divided society. And all the presentations here have attested to why tribalism is very important. I mean, it's so rewarding. I think it's, I've forgotten his name now, who published the book, Africa Walks, Patrick Chabal. And there is a concept there. He talks about what he calls the instrumentalization of failure in Africa. Which is, that is, and I found that a very powerful metaphor. Because he says, actually, the failure of African governments to deliver on what, as Nigerians like to say, the dividends of democracy, is actually an instrument. Because the reason why there is no light in Nigeria is because somebody is benefiting. The reason why there are no drugs in the hospital is because somebody else is benefiting. Every medical doctor in Nigeria working in a hospital has a plan B, either a private hospital or is working somewhere else. And the man is arguing that there is a method to the madness. And my argument, therefore, is, if this is the reality, if Nigeria were a less endowed country, then there are certain things we can afford to say. But what has become quite worrying about Nigeria, and for me as a priest, I mean, our area of business is the most invaded. Almost every retired, I mean, religion is such an extraordinarily lucrative business now in Nigeria. And I tell you, there was this guy who was driving. He's driving a Porsche Mercedes-Benz, and he falls into the hands. He's stopped by armed robbers. And the armed robbers said, your money or your life. The guy says, I don't have any money. What do you mean? You're driving a Mercedes-Benz like this beautiful suit, you don't have money? No, you have money. The guy says, I don't have any money. He says, well, take off your suit. So he takes off his coat. The armed robber feels it, nothing. He said, come on, take off your shoes. Guy takes off his shoes, he looks, no money. He says, okay. He brings out the pockets of his trousers. He said, okay, take off your trousers. The guy pulls out his trousers, no money. And then now, he says, take off your singlet. Takes off his singlet. The poor man is standing only with his underwear. And then the armed robber uses his gun and he says, I'm sure you have money. The guy says, I don't have any money. So he uses the nozzle of his gun to pull down the guy's underpants, and right underneath is a wad of naira. Now, the armed robber doesn't touch the money. He doesn't touch the money. Instead, he sits on the bonnet of the car and says, it is people like you that make Nigeria. It is people like you. He says, we're working hard to keep this country great. It is people like you that are destroying our country. I ask you a simple question. You can't, I ask you a simple question. You can't tell the truth. You can't tell the simple truth, and you expect Nigeria to progress? Now, it is, what we have in Nigeria now, and I consider it very disturbing. Because what we have now is a superfluous expression of Christianity that has actually become a danger to the body politic of Nigeria. I mean, I go to many offices, and if you ever travel to Nigeria, you go to an office, most secretaries, 9 out of 10 in the ministry are reading their Bible. And I said to them, I'm a priest, I'll be more than happy for you to read the Bible. But the federal government of Nigeria did not hire you to read your Bible. Now, and the question is, and I believe that my duty and my responsibility is to energize Christianity and say that this is really not what Jesus Christ meant in our lives. But it is possible to understand why things are the way they are in Nigeria. Religion has become a refuge of scoundrels precisely because, in the north, there's what they call, if you go to the houses of many big men in the north, most of them, including in Abuja, they have mosques in their homes. Now, there is a name for those mosques. They're small mosques where they pray, but they're always in front of the house. And the name for them in Hausa is Allah Ganaka. That is, God, here is your own. And the idea is, I know I stole all this stuff that I built this beautiful, but God, I didn't quite forget you. So here is your own part of the loop. Let me try and summarize. From where I come, and I just end with a story about my own parish and what I'm trying to do, because I've had all these beautiful stories Pastor Tommy and others have told. I run a small, it's not an NGO really, I call it Project 1912. Project 1912 simply means the 19th of December. That's the day I was ordained. When I turned 20 years a priest, some of my friends, I think Pastor Tommy was there, Pascal Dozier, a lot of, they said, we must celebrate this. And I said, okay. And one friend of mine whispered to me, because that was the fashion in Nigeria. If you're a priest and you're having a celebration, people feel the urge to buy you a car. And I said, look, I don't want a car. Can you give me the money? And they said, why should we? I said, no, I want the money. Because look, today I'm Secretary General of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. I've got 4 drivers at my disposal. I've got cars. I don't need a car. So I said, give me the money. But we had a small event, and my dream was, please, I hope you can give me 1 minute. My dream was to just get enough money. 150,000 naira was my projection. Because I knew kids in my little village whose future was in danger because they couldn't pay. It was 1,500 naira then to buy the form for their WAEC examination. And I saw quite a lot of kids going. So I said, give me the money. And we invited a few people. My plan, my hope was we could raise about 100,000 or 150,000 that night. To cut a long story short, we raised, I think, about 2.5 million naira that night. Now, and it came to me as a shock. But my dream was just to ensure, you can't solve everybody's problems, but my dream was to just be able to make sure that I wanted to give the money, put the money in an account, ask my younger brother, look, any of these children you see or hear who is trying to go, please just pay. But the money, 2.5 million naira was a heck of money. So we decided to invest the money. Again, let me cut it the long story short. As I'm talking to you, in the last, this was December this year, I'll be 34 years a priest. So it's quite the project has gone on for quite some time now. But every year for the last 10 or so years, we have 150 kids on the program. And all I do is we pay their school fees, not much money, 5,000 naira, we buy them books and so on and so forth. And what has been very shocking for me was just the sheer, I go to my village all the time because my village is in the middle of nowhere, but I go there all the time so I can remind myself how gracious God was to me. I mean, God has been to me. But I also believe that, and I go home and these old women come with their stick to come and say, Father, we had that. We just want to thank you. My grandchild benefited from I have no idea what the turnout has been. But what has also been wonderful has been just the sheer amount of goodwill that people have demonstrated. When I came back from the Kennedy School, 2004, I was posted to a parish. And it was a parish in which 3 priests had died. And a lot of people, the priests were quite afraid. And people said to me, perhaps they've sent you there to die. But it turned out it was a parish I worked in 1977 as a young priest. So I went back there. I'm telling you this story because as we are talking, I just ran around, spent the last 5 years running around. We're now building and we've set up a fairly big computer place. It's going to be able to train some young people in IT and so on. And I think that we may not be able to solve the big problems, but I think wherever you start, it doesn't matter how small you think your contribution may be. I am always amazed. I mean, I traveled Nigeria a lot, but the people I meet Little things. Somebody tells you, Father, you know, you did this for me, you did that for me, and so on and so forth. So I just want to conclude by saying the Nigerian problem is big. It is indeed a big problem. But I think, first of all, we just pray that we've said goodbye to the soldiers. We may not have the best elections. And the next elections are going to be problematic. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Let's not deceive ourselves. Not because, and they will be problematic, not because Nigerians are bad people. They will be problematic because, like I said to people, to be president of Nigeria is not to be president of Niger, it's not to be president of Sudan. It is to be president and to be in charge of a massive distribution agency without restraint. So why Nigerian politics? Our politics will remain, the contest will be violent. It will be bloody. But, you know, it is not because we are bad people. And I also don't believe that we are hopeless or helpless. I believe the future is not here, but the future is not, the best is still not far away. Thank you very much.